All right, Buford, this one is for you. I do read the comments. It just takes me 1 to 2 business years to cover the backlog of requests. The concept of the fourth dimension is something that is almost able to be grasped by the human brain, but also something that completely eludes us. While consciously we can perceive the passage of time, we have no ability to affect it apart from just that aforementioned perception. As a result of that, we do not so much experience it, but are really subjected to it. So then the question is raised. To a species that may not be able to only just perceive it, but also interact much like we do with the third dimension, what would the world look like? Which brings us around to today's topic. As a group of passengers pass out on a plane heading towards their own demise, a flight landing in Boston, they would awake to find themselves scattered throughout the plane that they took off in with no pilots actually flying this bird. As they try to grapple with what that actually means, they make an emergency landing in Bangor because they overshoot their landing zone by a lot. Descending into the completely abandoned world, it raises some interesting implications for not only time travel, but also what reality that has already passed looks like. A species of timekeepers and an endless recycling capacity appears to be the only native life here. But what are these things? Why do they look like the way they do? And how would they even exist in the first place? Let's discuss that in today's episode covering the Langoliers. We kick off our story with clouds and flying above them. Horrifying to say the least, as we get the Langoliers sitting in California traffic because there's really nothing else to do in that state when you decide to drive. Two men talk about how a woman is just an innocent bystander and he won't do it, I guess. Anyway, so then he just heads towards the plane as the vampire gets out of the next car with dead eyes, and his name is Mr. Toomey, and he lost a ton of money on purpose as everyone gets dropped off and heads towards the plane of doom. Not because of anything crazy, but because it is in fact a plane, truly a testament to man's arrogance. The pilots then talk about flying as one of the other pilots is then pulled off the plane. He's told his ex-wife has succumbed in a fire in her apartment. Now it's moments like this, do you make the joke or do you not make the joke? Decisions. I guess you could say the divorce really burned her. Yeah! Anyways, he asks if she's okay, as he says yes. Except he lied. Well, I get it. It just depends on how recent that was, probably. And I feel like a lot of people probably wouldn't be devastated by the news, but I don't know, some might be. So there's a flight back to Boston he could take instead, offering condolences. The flight then takes off as they head off to the wonderful land of Boston. I know, pretty oxymoronic, right? The wonderful land of Boston simply doesn't exist. Given that it's a night flight, though, there's really only one thing to do. Pop some Benadryl, drink some tequila, and then visit the Hat Man because he owes you money. Taking the patented Roanoke maneuver because you don't want to be in the land of the living, flying, I guess. Everyone kind of just goes to sleep. As Blind Girl then wakes up later, she goes to wake up her aunt, who she wants a glass of water from, and yet she's not there. She then calls for help, as then she goes to see if anybody is there, but she cannot find a single soul. Well, I guess, C is not really what she is doing, but she then goes and tries to find anybody that she can. Finding a toupee, though, she assumes it to be a scalp. The pilot then wakes up as he heads back and sees nobody else is on the flight. Dinah continues freaking out, asking for her aunt, as other people then come back, but nobody is there. The pilot then heads to the front as Dinah asks Blondie if she's a teacher, because apparently it's in her voice. As everyone then tries to figure out what happened, they're flying over mountains and darkness. Typical flight over the mountains at nighttime. Wow, who would have guessed? Trying to get to the cockpit. Remember, this is pre-2000, so it's probably easier, as Hal then walks through the plane with Sunshine here trying to figure out what happened to them. Finding all their belongings and retainers, they cannot figure out what has transpired while they were sleeping, or even being stared at for several hours by a dark figure in a fedora. Deadeyes then comes to the front and yells at the pilot. Mr. Suave then gives him a titty twister on the nose, which subdues him because he's a nerd, and then he starts crying, which, man, that's pretty embarrassing. Blondie watches in horror at him bullying this dork, but it'll mean absolutely nothing because, they'll kiss later. And as they just return to the front, everybody is concerned. The cockpit now opens for some reason as they realize nobody is driving the plane, expertly deduced by the 90s pop icon over here. She said it, not me. Driving the plane, very good. Sunshine says what's weird is things that were inside of people were left behind, like pacemakers. And seeing all the memes online about things that were inside of people left behind, people are weird out in public. But anyways, pilot gets on the horn and calls out to anyone, but nobody answers, as all he gets is just static. They discuss maybe there was a nuclear war, maybe they just got left behind as the plane deboarded, which, no. All the clapping from the dorks would have awoken you. And I still don't know why people clap when a plane lands. There are over 1 million people basically subscribed to this channel that allegedly also watch. One of you has statistically clapped. I'm here to say, stop that.
You there! Go check out our fundraiser for our short film. Scan the QR code on screen to get there right now. Okay. Bye.
Assuming direct control of the aircraft, Hal then comes back and suggests should they introduce themselves because, they're the only ones left apparently, as Stephen King plugs himself as a character, saying he's written over 40 novels.
500 cigarettes.
Sunshine is on his way to Berkeley School of Music. Pop Icon is going to hang out with her aunt. Most everyone here has no real interesting backstory, and this is my channel, so, I just kind of make up the names and the actual personhood doesn't matter. I don't know, call it ADHD or something. Anyway, so the pilot then asks Churchill here what he does for work, as he sort of laughs and says he fixes things that need fixing. Not sketch at all. So looking at the radar, there's no other planes anywhere to be seen, and also no lights. As everyone discusses where everyone could have gone, the pilot says the plane is undamaged, as Deadeyes then freaks out about landing in Bangor rather than Boston. Honestly, saves you from going to Boston. Deadeyes then starts crashing out, seeing everyone have no eyes. What does this mean exactly? Well, it'll never really be explained, or even referenced again. So, I guess I have like a theory on what's going on. You gotta remember, all of Stephen King's stories are like intertwined. They're in the same universe, I guess the best way to put it. Anyway, so Dinah then turns around, sensing him having the crash out of the century, as he instead relaxes, realizing everyone here is a monster man. So sitting down, he chills out and then starts tearing napkins for some reason. I suppose it's a pretty good coping mechanism. So everyone just continues to vibe out on the plane, trying to figure out what could have possibly transpired that caused them to wake up and everybody else to disappear. Surely, someone would have screamed if they were taken by force, and only these people were left behind. Hal then comes up with a bit of a theorem. Maybe a shadow government chose them as test subjects. Possibly the captain is in on it. However, it does not hold up, because all the cities are also dark and nothing is going on. Continuing their horrific flight, light is beginning to break as they continue heading towards Bangor. Dinah then keeps asking questions, as she asks Blondie why she lied about going to Boston. Evidently, she met a guy through the correspondence in a newspaper, which apparently is super embarrassing back in the day, which, man, different times. I met my girlfriend on Hinge, which is basically like corresponding through a newspaper. It's a tool like anything else, really. You still gotta be a normal person to actually get somebody to like you. Crazy to see how things have changed since this movie. So Blondie was trying to not play it safe for once, but, all I can say is just stay strapped or get clapped, I suppose. But considering she was flying out to meet a guy, probably, doing both. So the captain then turns on the seatbelt sign, as they are now about to descend into Bangor. They have no idea what's under the clouds at this point, as Deadeyes keeps tearing magazines. Everyone is scared to descend, as Sunshine then makes his move on Pop Icon, with them beginning to hit a little bit of turbulence. See, her response is just be naturally on a plane, even under really good flight conditions. I hate these things. But you will not catch me being an influencer with the camera facing me in first class, screaming at the top of my lungs like an idiot. It's not gonna happen. However, internally, in economy class, I'm definitely screaming. So as they descend, they immediately, internally, not externally. Remember, it's an important part. They immediately crash. Thanks for watching also. No, okay, that is the dumbest running joke on this channel. Pop Icon then goes for her own move on Sunshine here, which, nice, it's working. So for some reason, this is extra turbulent on their descent, and for some reason, at 3,000 feet up, they're like, well, the clouds should break at about 500 feet, allegedly. Of course, have they never heard of a heavy fog? So as they keep going, they then break through, as they are still over the Atlantic. I'm a little confused. Weren't they just over mountains a minute ago? And now they're descending over the Atlantic? Okay, so flying over the forest, they see all the buildings are really there, as Blondie then celebrates, but Hal says, sorry, miss, but you are all wrong. Going to land the plane, tower control doesn't answer, as he says, well, just tell everybody to get out of the way. I'm going to land regardless. Approaching the terminal, everyone then claps, but the plane is totally deserted. And remember, desert has 2 S's because you want more. Desert has 1 because nobody wants more of that. Deadeyes then goes to the door as the pilot says, logic is telling me if they survived, then there must be others who have probably survived as well. Okay, so anyways, they have an emergency landing situation going on here, so they use the slide to get off the plane. Getting out, there is no odor or smell, which are the same thing, as Dinah then says the place smells wrong. Someone cut a fart. There is nothing to smell, apparently, and nothing to hear. No birds or tarmacs, or, well, tarmac smell, or vehicles in the distance, nothing. So Deadeyes starts having flashbacks about his old man yelling about, him getting a B in school, as if that wasn't good enough, which, hey, Dad, C's get degrees, brother. Of course, one time I came home and had to show my dad I got a 42 on a test in English in 4th grade. That was bad. So he starts talking about the Langoliers and how they eat people who waste time. Churchill then calms down Deadeyes as they all head over to the terminal. I mean, at this point, just let him go off and do his own thing. Hell, walk to Boston if you really want to. Dinah then says Blondie's heels striking the concrete sound weak, as if they don't have any strength. Heading in through the baggage, The airport is completely abandoned, which is a fantastic sign. Checking the clocks, they are all stuck on the same time, which is a fantastic sign. Pop Icon then scares Sunshine as Hal shows up asking for one, as in a cigarette.
500 cigarettes.
Checking his watch, he starts coughing as they ask about if time feels off to anybody else. They realize this event must have happened at 4:07 Bangor time, as everyone else was asleep. Everyone here is hungry as Dinah then starts listening to something. Hal then tells Pop Icon to save her matches as they realize Deadeyes has disappeared. They call out but realize there's no Echo in the airport, and also, why do you care if you find him? They've basically been transported to the back rooms of airports. Meanwhile, Deadeye's dad arrives to rustle his jimmies as he asks if he's ready to go get with the program. Deadeyes, have you ever considered just swinging on your old man and seeing what happens? He keeps telling him the Langoliers are going to chew the eyes out of his head, as then he hears the rest of the group yelling for him. Also, the size of the Langoliers indicates probably not. Running to go hide for some reason, Dinah then says she feels something, but the glass is wrong. She says she hears something also very faint in the distance. She says that it sounds like Rice Krispies after pouring milk. Product placement. She definitely hears something across the hill and in that direction. It's closer now than it was when they first got there. And she says if they don't GO by the time it gets there, then they are all biting the dust. Meanwhile, Deadeyes contemplates the sewer slide method as he starts tearing apart paper to just sort of chill out. They ask Dinah if the noise is closer now, as she says, well, I'm kind of unsure. Heading to the restaurant, they eat real quick. The matches don't work, that were actually in the restaurant, and the food itself tastes wrong, like chewing paper. Opening the beer, there is no fizz, and it also tastes like paper. Fantastic! However, you know it would taste great if they did have access to it? Today's sponsor! But first, this episode is sponsored by Factor. Are you ready to eat fresh, never frozen, delicious meals that are delivered directly to your door? If you are, then head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Roanoke FB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code Roanoke FB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. It's a new year once again. You said it last year and the year before, so now it's time to actually make money moves on your nutrition. For real. Do it already. If you're trying to get into shape, forget just working out or running more. Foundationally, it begins with nutrition. The only people outworking a bad diet are military members, and even then, it's pretty close. I'm gonna level with you. That's where it all starts. What you put in your body for fuel. With their 100 plus weekly rotating meal options, and with meals that are like vegan, veggie, keto, calorie smart, or my personal favorite, Protein Plus, you can stay fuller for longer, and now you're eating properly while focusing on your efforts. Plus, with no refined seed oils, refined sugars, sweeteners, or artificial colors, your body will actually like what you're eating. So if you're ready to take your dietary needs seriously, then head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Roanoke FB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. So Deadeyes is still crashing out as he grabs the force multiplier and then goes to find the rest of the group. He alleges he's still going to make it to Boston, making the scene as Dinah says she hears something because nobody can just use their eyes apparently and look for this guy. I mean, like, look with your special eyes. Deadeyes then fires a shot. But like everything else here, it doesn't do anything. However, it freaks out old Sunshine here because he jumped in the way of Pop Icon and he thinks he's been hit. Well, technically he did, but it bounced off. Pop Icon now loves him for this as they subdue Deadeyes. Churchill then kicks Deadeyes as everyone is upset at that, which did y'all just forget he fired a shot at Sunshine here? Also, furthermore, this is going to make basically no sense here in about an hour of runtime in this movie because why that didn't pierce his sternum is beyond me, and also, furthermore, why the powder even ignited in the first place makes no sense. Hal continues talking about what happened here as he says it has happened to them, not to the world. He starts delineating the two things, the plane versus the world. The weather patterns have stopped. He suggests it's time they're actually dealing with. Maybe a hole appeared in time and they slipped through. The pilot realizes that they flew through an aurora borealis in the Mojave Desert. An aurora borealis in this part of the country at this time of year? Hal then suggests they have time traveled, but not really. Instead of time itself basically being traveled through, it has progressed and it has left them behind. Dinah then hears the sound much closer this time around, and the plan is to get on the plane and fly back through it. However, the jet fuel won't burn, and it also can't melt steel beams. Hearing the noise then approach, everyone can now hear what it is, but they just can't see it. Meanwhile, Deadeyes is still on the ground, hanging out, as Dinah then asks about the Langoliers, as Deadeye says he used to think that they were just make-believe, but now he can hear it too. He keeps telling a story about Langoliers and how his old man told him this just to scare him, as Blondie then yells at him to stop talking about it because he's like, you're making Dinah afraid. Now, I think he's making you afraid. She then asks if the Langoliers got his dad, as Dinah says she's not ugly. None of them are, even if he thinks it, which I don't know what that even means. They have about 500 pounds of fuel left, they realize, in that plane, but they would need a few thousand pounds to make it back. Sunshine now alleges he has the solution to their problem. Getting back to the plane, Sunshine then suggests the plane is more there for, like, some reason, I guess. What does it even mean? Well, we'll get there in a second. So pulling the matches, they don't work at first. As the light begins fading outside, night falls once more. Lighting it again, the matches finally start working. The present is still in the plane, as the beer now works, as at first it was flat, but now it fizzes. So it takes a few seconds for the process to work. Meanwhile, Deadeyes slips his binds. Realizing everything works in the plane, Deadeyes now slinks away and grabs a knife. Dinah says they need to check on Deadeyes, as it suggested he's unconscious. Okay, so, and you base that on what exactly? Dinah now can hear Deadeye's heartbeat as allegedly he's scared. He then runs out and stabs Dinah as she says he says she's a Langolier for some reason. Having stabbed her, I'm curious as to how exactly the stab works, but not a literal bullet hitting somebody's sternum. So I'm gonna complain about this because sometimes in life you just gotta do it. So let me get this straight. The matches don't light in the airport, but they light on the plane, okay? For some reason, the bullet was able to be fired and the powder was ignited from the actual primer, but the bullet being fired didn't actually pierce the sternum. However, being stabbed by a knife can pierce your chest. You see, like, what? That does none of these, all of these things disprove each other, but somehow it just works. Anyways, we call that a plot device, a plot hole, nonsense. Stephen King snorting a line of snow in Maine during this point. Anyways, so you just got, it is what it is, man. So seeing as this is a potential hemothorax or pneumothorax situation, Deadeyes then starts hearing his dad talk to him. So the question is, how do you deal with a pneumothorax? Pneumothorax is basically when air starts getting into your lungs, like the actual pleural cavity. It creates like a sucking wound. I believe the old way was you were supposed to like cover up the wound. I've heard something that said now you're not supposed to. Don't really know how true that is. As far as a hemothorax is concerned, though, that's when the actual pleural cavity fills up with blood and then collapses your lungs. That part is really bad, so you want to definitely watch out for that. But anyways, that's why you don't pull the knife out, because actually what it is it could be creating the suction necessary for the lungs to still be operating. When you pull that knife, air gets in there, blood vessels can bleed more freely. It's an entire situation. Just letting you know, that's what got Steve Irwin. The fact is that when he got stabbed in the heart with the barb from the stingray, I always got to preface this, Steve Irwin would not want us to take recompense on those vile creations, but also B, when he pulled out the actual barb, that's what caused the bleed out. So, but it was all instinct at that point, because that would really hurt. Anyway, so Churchill now attempts to help her as they talk a lot about random things, as Sunshine then builds a soap and a sock situation, except upgraded to a toaster and a sheet. Also, probably should mention the blade did break off in Dinah's stylish chest wound. Ouchies. Locked and loaded with a toaster, they then approach Deadeye's lair as he has the knife ready. Or at least a piece of the knife, I'm guessing. Rainbow Shirt then gets stabbed as Sunshine then swings the toaster as he hits him in the head. See? How is he down? Like, how did... It doesn't make any sense. So, using the toaster to hit his head again, he lets him back up and then hits him again. See, Gears of War curb stomp time is all I'm saying. Letting him back up again, he then hits him and then sees he's bleeding from his head as Sunshine then throws up. The best time to curb him was the first time. The second best time is right now. Dinah now starts crashing out due to her injuries as the pilot then sets a flight plan. Pop Icon comes in asking, why aren't they all back yet? As she suggests, maybe they're all donezo. We should probably just leave them behind. No, she doesn't suggest that, but she's implying it. She asks if the pilot is scared, as he says yes. She's like, it's good to be scared with somebody. No, it's better if somebody lies to you and says they're not scared, because then you're like, okay, well, they're not scared, then we're probably fine, right? You can lie to yourself. So Hal then says he hears shouting out there, as they can hear that the noise is getting closer. Churchill then finds Sunshine crying as he gives him a pep talk on his first game end, I guess you could call it. So checking Deadeye's pulse, he then says, oh, you know what? He's not gone. He's just out cold. Feeling relieved, well, Rainbow Shirt is still gone, though, and grabbing the stretcher, Sunshine is told to go with the others as Churchill goes to suffocate Deadeyes, but is told in his head by Dinah that they need him, so don't take him out. The sun has risen again as they pull Dinah onto the plane. Blondie's now vibing with Churchill as everyone then heads out onto the tarmac. Realizing day is happening once more, how they didn't know that. Like, look, it's daytime, but it's already like broad daylight at this point. Like, the light was way out before they even commented on this. Anyways, so Dinah now wakes up Deadeyes as they put Blondie in the truck and push the fuel truck towards the plane. Yes, but how are you going to actually get the pump to the plane? Like, you know, unless the plane, or like the fuel of the plane, unless the plane uses suction. I actually have no clue how fuel is compressed upwards into the plane and it draws it in. It'll take about an hour though to get the plane fueled up properly. Dinah now taunts Deadeyes in his head, saying the squad is here for the meeting and how he has to get up and make said meeting. They're all waiting for him. The engine is not happy about the fuel, as it then is changed over to present day fuel. Deadeyes then starts crawling out to them as the noise is getting louder. Dinah appears to be slipping away as they watch her talking to Deadeyes. Crawling on baggage claim, the power lines now start moving as Pop Icon yells, "Make it stop," or just go inside the plane. You could always do that. Deadeyes now makes it outside to see the meeting is in fact taking place. Hooray! As he runs out, like Sunshine and Hal see him running towards them and they do nothing to stop him. Like, they don't even attempt like a defense maneuver in case he's running at them. Couldn't be me. So as the power lines fall, Deadeyes then makes the meeting as he gives his report to Stephen King about how much money he made for them. -$43 million. All for you. Deliberately, apparently, as his dad then calls him a stupid fool. Deadeyes says the Langoliers don't even exist, and as he does a hand gesture at them with trees falling, he does like this little, like, I do that to my cats before I like grab their entire heads. So as they look out, meatballs with teeth now approach as they start eating everything in sight. Spotting Deadeyes, they go after him, bypassing the plane entirely full of people, as then they go into the ground and continue their pursuit. Eating him, they then close up the plane as they go to take off, but they keep making holes in the ground that exit into nothing. Initiating rapid takeoff, the entire airport starts getting eaten as they realize Dinah used him as bait. Ruthless. These things are the timekeepers getting rid of the past in the most efficient way possible. Just like the casino with my money. Punching it to 150 miles per hour, the Langoliers then pull up next to the plane as the aircraft approaches the ledge. Of course, look at it this way. Even if you fell, the plane should still be able to take off as speed would be gathered as you fell, I imagine. Like, you're falling, the plane's like, the engines are still catching air, and then eventually you would be able just to pull up. Anyway, so the airport then falls away below into nothingness as they now head off into the unfriendly skies above the clouds, knowing that there is nothing below their feet. The plan now is to head back the way that they came in. Churchill and Blondie kiss because, why not? As Dinah is still somehow alive. Sunshine and Pop Icon kiss also because why not? And that was a absolutely horrible angle to do that. It is now night again as the planet is gone, so it doesn't really matter. Churchill now says, well, how's the planet gone? Is the whole planet gone? Okay, so if the whole planet's gone, it really doesn't make any sense because then it would just be day. So Churchill now says he was there to take out someone named Mr. O'Bannon, as then he asks the pilot if he's got anything that he's hiding. He says his ex succumbed to a fire in Boston, and he tells him he wanted to tell her something, but he waited too long. However, after this, Churchill says he is probably just going to give up taking people out because he is atoned. Dinah now wakes up and tells Blondie she got what she wanted. Okay, then. Evidently, she wanted to sacrifice Deadeyes for funsies, I guess? Yeah, maybe it was necessary, so she flatlines out from her injuries. She also got to see through Deadeyes' eyes, which apparently was wonderful, although technically it would be overwhelming for the occipital lobe to see this, which, story time. So there was actually a man who was cured of his blindness a few years back, which actually maybe a decade at this point because time is accelerating as far as I can tell. Essentially blind from birth, when they corrected his vision, his brain actually really didn't know how to interpret what he was seeing. What I find interesting is the brain actually takes shortcuts all the time, trying to figure out the reality of what's happening around it. This means reality itself is not exactly as it appears, as our brains are interpreting it, and you have to do that through meat. So when I get migraines, this actually becomes very apparent. I will see blind spots, and like if I try to look at people's faces, it'll literally disappear, but the skin is still there. So while my brain is receiving no visual information for that spot, the brain will fill in missing spots because it knows what's supposed to be there, just doesn't know a face is supposed to be there. Literally, people look like Slender Man, by the way. So now, as far as the blind man is concerned, his brain had no shortcuts. It had nothing to base what it was seeing on around it on the past, as nothing had been formed. So basically, he had the vision of a newborn with an adult brain, which is a bit slower on the pickup due to decreased neuroplasticity. Because of this, he would see like flashes of color and shapes, but couldn't really discern what they were, which I wonder how he's doing now. Surely his brain has had enough time to like come to terms and view things differently, but again, it would take him quite a long time for his brain to actually form these associations. So checking the flight log, one area is circled where it appears as though that's where they came through based on the time. Hal now gets up saying something is wrong. Looking out, they begin approaching the Aurora Borealis as Hal then starts yelling to stop. He says they all have to be asleep as they turn around and leave the Aurora. Ah yes, the approach would be all wrong. Churchill then hurts his arm, apparently. Well, broke it, some would claim, as the explanation is now set. They have to go to sleep if they want to move through the portal. Circling, they ask how they can even do this, put everyone to sleep, but nobody's even tired. The pilot now has an idea though. Drop the air pressure to 7 psi, which will force everybody into unconsciousness, but someone has to stay awake to turn on the pressure so that they can actually wake back up and don't, like, stay asleep and then just crash. Churchill then offers to do it, as he instead goes and then talks to Blondie because she protests. He's not really been an alpha Chad his entire life, so he suggests he can do this as atonement, and he must do so that she can tell someone that he did atone for what he has done. So making out with Churchill one last time, who knows, maybe he will survive at the end. Putting on the seatbelts, which do nothing in a crash anyways, they approach the wormhole as everyone is fighting sleep for some reason. As they all go to pass out, the pilot then tells Churchill he loves him as the oxygen masks drop. Passing out, Churchill then talks to the pilot as he turns back on the air, as Churchill then watches them enter the wormhole. All I'm saying is, given how quickly everybody passed out, he could have survived this too, right? He could have just let everybody pass out for longer, and then maybe like 2 minutes before the wormhole done it, and then they would have flown through, and then he could have turned on the air. It just seemed like an unnecessary sacrifice. So moving through, he is zapped to God knows where, as the pilot then wakes back up, seeing him gone. Getting on the radio, he then calls out to anyone, as evidently there is no heavy traffic down there. Nothing is really at all below them. Beginning their descent, they've officially run out of fuel. Landing, the engines cannot fire, as it's all friction brakes, baby! Seeing the truck over yonder, they approach the hallway, which the name absolutely eludes me. Everything around them is the same, which totally sucks. Then heading back to the plane, the pilot says they need to get off the plane this time, as they then crawl through the floor and head out. They hear a humming noise as they smell jet fuel, as the ground feels real and continues to make noise. Heading to the terminal, they then follow Hal to a restaurant, as the sandwich apparently is delicious. They get up against the wall as they are waiting for a world that's actually about to be born rather than be eaten. So as everything goes completely psychedelic, I guess, they can see people moving around as everyone phases into reality, as the youngling then points at them as he says, "Look at the new people. They've arrived and survived their super fun ordeal," and thus concludes the Langoliers. So before moving to the science section of this one, I do want to point out one of the things to remember. Again, all of this happens in the same universe. So this most definitely, this is the same crap that, Pennywise would probably travel through or something. All of this stuff just seems to happen. So you're dealing with, time traveling entities and, Aurora Borealis and spring and all this nonsense. So it's a fairly interesting idea, but we're going to move on currently. So I was sitting here thinking about what exactly we would talk about when it comes to basically floating meatballs with teeth, and actually there is quite a bit. Obviously we'll get into, the physics before we get into the true Chad science biology, but I have to warn you, it is unfortunate, but the physics portion is kind of more interesting. So, the reality is you just never sort of end on a lower note, I suppose, which we have to ask ourselves an interesting question, which will help us to understand this classification of species. Where exactly are we, and how does this work with human perception? Turns out, not all too well, and this goes back to my intro at the beginning of this episode. Humans are three-dimensional creatures. This is where we exist, and this is what we can concretely perceive. Now, is concretely a word? Honestly, I don't know. So as a result of that, the world around us makes sense, because this is how reality itself is interpreted by the meat in your skull. Now, what does that giant word salad even mean? Basically, the world makes sense because our brains have decided it makes sense based on our senses. So when we move through this landscape, we have height, width, and depth of what we can see. This produces three-dimensional objects that we can observe and interact with. However, let's do a bit of a thought experiment with this one. So let's say we were not three-dimensional beings, but instead two-dimensional. If this were the case, then in this universe, we would not be able to see depth, but instead, let's assume only width and height. Everything would appear flat to us, sort of like looking at a 2D scroller video game, but this would be how the world is. There could be implied depth, but the reality is our brains would not be able to identify depth to the caliber of 3D. However, we would still interact with three-dimensional objects even if we could only perceive 2 dimensions, sort of like you would walk past a tree that would be completely flat to you, or you could grab hold of something, but it would be completely flat to you. But that's the thinking going forward. Interaction and perception are different from one another. Now extrapolate this out to our current interactions in reality. As we move through our three-dimensional universe, we are very aware that there is another dimensional plane that we interact with quite regularly, whether we like it or not, and may not really be able to see it, but we know that it's there. We are being ushered along a pipeline that eventually leads to our own end. As a prank. This would be the 4th dimension, and this is time. I like the way that Interstellar actually did this, as it shows the rules of our universe and how we can conceptualize it. So think of the room that you are in currently. It's three-dimensional and time is passing while you are in it. However, the fourth dimension works like you can kind of imagine yourself in this room as sort of like an elevator ascending. Each floor, so to speak, is a moment in time. Just because you leave that floor doesn't mean it ceases to exist, it just means that you are no longer on that floor. Given that limitations of human perception are very prevalent, we cannot really see it actively happening, which, much like a two-dimensional creature cannot see depth, but we can really kind of catch glimpses of it, I guess, so to speak, by simply existing and realizing that this immediate second is the present. Actually, I think a second is too long to call it the present. The present is insanely small, and by the time you even cognitively register it, it's already gone into the past, and you are already not there because you are now in the future. Time is weird. As this process continues, your timeline essentially joins with everyone else's to become the past reality. Consciously, you are always in the present, and as far as you know, you are never in the past. Which, cue the Vsauce sound, or are you? See, I base this only on movie logic here, but I imagine something way more horrifying exists. Given that everything was composed of matter within the movie and then left behind like planes, buildings, trees, which is interesting in and of itself because that's a living creature, that means really, if this logic holds up, humanity itself and every living thing still existing here would still exist in the past. However, much like how the air was dead, there was a fundamental issue that would arise, which interestingly is how we can relate to our own reality and how it's connected to time. If we look at how the food has no taste, the air has no smell, the batteries are all depleted, sound doesn't echo, you don't have a girlfriend, you're breathing manually, fire doesn't work, jet fuel won't burn or melt steel beams, and the day and night cycle doesn't have any basis, what we are really seeing is a world without energy exchange, and that's all it really is, the flow of energy. While there appears to be residual energy left over after the present has already passed, it still takes time for it to dissipate. They call this dead time for a reason. Because there's no energy differences, and as a result, all matter has become still, the reality is, in this universe with no energy, they would have frozen the second they stepped off that plane, as it would be absolute zero outside, meaning no atoms are vibrating, but even still, with their no energy differences as perception of time in an area passes, this means no chemical reactions take place fueling life. But still, one thing seems to persist, and that's atoms. Given that atoms are still holding together, but there is no movement, sound, or really oxygen to engage with these chemical reactions, there is no life. However, there would still be humans stuck in place, no longer serving a functional purpose. Which then raises another question, which is everyone's favorite tangent on this channel, the idea of consciousness being something our bodies pick up, not something that comes from our actual minds. Now, this idea, if you're new here, always gets a little out there, so think of it more as again, a thought experiment rather than a biological principle, but the idea is we are not really all that sure where consciousness comes from in our brain as of yet. Maybe one day we can properly map it, but it appears as though the mind works in a way that sometimes it seems like consciousness shouldn't even be possible. Take, for instance, a Frenchman in 2007. Of course, he had to be French. He was born with hydrocephalus, which basically a large area of his brain was fluid-filled, and neurons did not form in this area. Roughly 90% of what should have been brain tissue was missing space. He was 44 in 2007, so I think he's 63 now if that maths, but he has 2 kids and is married. His IQ is said to be around 75, which is low normal but still functional, and they only found out because he had leg pain and then went to the hospital. When they scanned his brain, they found he only had a thin shell of brain on the outside of his skull. Now, this process wasn't immediate, so I guess saying being born is incorrect with this, but over his lifespan, the cerebral spinal fluid would actually continue pressing on the brain until it pushed into what was, I guess, the living tissue, and then that pushed it outwards to just the very edges of the skull, but his brain adapted. So what does this say? Well, consciousness is incredibly complex, as you might imagine. More so because humans can think abstractly, which requires, I guess, more than you may realize when it comes to the brain's operational status. But you gotta think of it for a moment about this whole process. As we sit here, the thought that you are thinking currently, possibly in relation to this, must come from somewhere. But where? It could just be in response to the stimuli around you, as me talking to you, but that much is, it's pretty clear that does exist with animals as they react to stimuli. But what about thought that is not in response to anything? What if there was no stimuli? And this is what delineates humans and makes us weird. We are not just smarter than the animals around us and dunking on everything on this planet. The main issue is that we can pull ideas out of thin air. There is no stimuli to spur their creation. They exist because they are conceptualized. I know this sort of sounds like but bringing it down to a neurological level, what neuron is responsible for starting a thought that has never been thought by any human prior? Take physicists for instance. I don't know why I messed up that word, but many times ideas and equations come out of this STEM field and have never been explained by humans prior or conceptualized or anything because it's all built on other ideas. Now, it is a natural progression for humans to kind of think this way, but how do we progress? Ideas are born out of data, but I mean, there must be like a certain level of imagination that must be initially applied and then pursued. And to that end, where does that imagination come from? Because it doesn't exist. None of this exists, is basically what I'm trying to get like the point across. So how do we conceptualize it if it doesn't exist? Normally, our brains should be cause and effect. There should be a stimuli, we should react. But if you're not reacting to a stimuli and it doesn't even exist in the first place, then what are you truly reacting to? So it all has to begin somewhere, which, again, how does the initial neuron know before the idea is even thought of to fire in such a way as to recruit other neurons to form this thought? And that's why the idea that potentially consciousness doesn't exist within our bodies, but instead our bodies are tuned to a certain frequency and receive consciousness is a little bit, I guess, different. The consciousness would be different for all of us. If that is the case, and it does turn out to be true, which again, this is a thought experiment, so take it with a grain of salt, then it would sort of prove that we have been calling like God or the universe, but that would exist as, this would be foundational, I suppose, as like a river of consciousness that all our other conscious thoughts branch off of. Which, interestingly, this wording has been used before, at least in the Bible symbolically. It mentions how humanity is made in God's image, not you, creature. So essentially, we would reflect the origination from God, but not that we are made of God. It's interesting. And many other religions actually take this same route as well, which means collectively as a species, we appear to agree somewhat on what we are, even if we don't fully understand what we are, or how exactly that progenitor of consciousness appears. So ultimately, like the statement about this is just believe whatever you want. But at the end of the day, we are human. So agreeing with one another is not really our forte, unless it's about Tally being best girl, the anglerfish deserving nukes to the face, and Amy should not have survived the ruins. But apart from those three things, we all tend to disagree with one another all the time on virtually everything. So how does that relate to this timeline exactly? Because we're definitely getting a little off track. Well, this would indicate that the defining factor is consciousness existing externally in the present, requiring chemical reactions to be taking place in order to stay tuned to the frequency of consciousness that we are perceiving. Without chemical reactions keeping that power going, so to speak, then this means we stop. Everything stops. We are simply atoms in place, a car without a driver. I believe the reality they found themselves in would look much more like this rather than like a completely empty world, because why would humans cease to exist but plants still exist? Makes very little sense given our bodies are still composed of atoms. So with this in mind, how can we rationalize then that they are even making it here in the first place? Well, the Aurora Borealis, which also sets up the Langoliers, believe it or not, but first the extension of consciousness. I know we're still talking about that. For this line of thinking, you can kind of view it not so much as a broadcasted frequency, like it's not a radio branching out in all different directions, but it might actually be similar to the lines attached to everyone from Donnie Darko. And if you've not watched that movie, it's fairly interesting as far as like what our choices actually are versus what aren't choices but feel like choices. But as the people who were asleep moved through the aurora on the plane, their consciousness was disrupted, and so that line was not aware of what was happening. This is sort of a ridiculous thought process, but hey, it is what it is. As they awoke, the lines of consciousness would actually stretch back through the portal, allowing them to persist in a place with maximum entropy. A portion of reality that they have already existed in that was a lower floor than they just were on because they doubled back. And this specific moment in time is frozen. It is no longer the present progressing, but the past, and the smallest unit of time measurable, which really would be infinitely small, where time has completely stopped because it is frozen in place. Difficult to rationalize in your head, but the reality is nobody was ever meant to really be here observing this. So in this reality, a piece of frozen time is also existing with every other moment near it in this elevator metaphor, I guess you could say, but they just so happen to be at this one specific point. The noise they are hearing is not so much the world being devoured around them, but the other timelines being devoured before them as the energy from this moment begins to bleed into the present only and then leave the past. So as they step out onto this world, it's very hollow because it only exists with fleeting energy as the past is being eaten. What might be interesting to you, or horrifying, is the idea of how this actually may relate to the backrooms. In the backrooms, you sort of just no-clip out of reality into a sort of sub-reality where monsters live. This means every passing second or microsecond, or at any point in the present consciousness of you, you're just no longer inhabiting your past you. this version of you is stuck in the past and then is devoured. Now, if it's all based on consciousness being present only, then the past you is never conscious when it's devoured. However, if consciousness is preserved, then this means every time the present passes, there is a version of you stuck in the past horrified as everything feels off, and then they are devoured. Seems like a pretty cruel universe if that was the case, but there's no way to actually test if that's reality or not. So I suppose you should just hang on to the present as hard as you possibly can if you don't ever want to, slip into your past self. Phrasing. So existential terror aside, because we definitely needed to cover that, as a treat, let's move to the Langoliers and the potential origins, because I believe that's why you were actually here. Or not, who knows? I don't know. People on Reddit say they're not even here at all. So something to understand about these creatures is much like in our three-dimensional reality, they appear to not just be three-dimensional, but have other dimensional, imperceptible forms to humans is the best way to put it. So let's say, again, you were hunting a two-dimensional deer. You could see you as a threat approaching it, but it could not really see the depth that you possess or how close you actually were, because that third dimension would cause some issues. However, ultimately, if you did catch it, it wouldn't really matter at all. I guess you could still eat it. Granted, if it was completely flat, I would assume it would be razor sharp and then slice one of your atoms on the way down and then detonate your entire meat suit into a nuclear hellfire, but you can kind of think of the Langoliers as such. They are a species that does not exist within time itself, but outside of it, and it would be like living in a house, really, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, there's a lot of metaphors in this episode, I know. Inside of the house, the area is controlled and stable. Outside, the elements reign. This is the same thought process. Inside of our reality, and then outside our reality, is simply where the Langoliers reside on all timelines, everywhere eating the past as it appears in a continual cycle. The reality is, they do not really ever come across life and chemical reactions, and instead, they eat dead time. It's very likely that our reality, the present, with its chemical reactions and life and energy, is actually incredibly toxic to these creatures. What we are witnessing is simply an ecosystem, but instead of existing in the present, it simply exists outside of our perception of time. When we came across them, much like the deer analogy, we can see them in their three-dimensional forms, but we cannot perceive the fourth-dimensional form as it's outside of our understanding of time. But pretty much, just know, stretching all the way back to when the actual timeline is eaten, all of their forms exist simultaneously in these moments until they consume, and then exist that, I guess they only exist as long as that plane of existence is there. Once the job is complete, they're really not bound by the rules of time, so they just sort of exit out of that temporal area, I suppose. But when we look at them, they really appear like a species that's been adapted to this task, but where they may have originated from is a complete unknown. However, if it's easy enough as just going through an aurora over the Mojave Desert, then that being the only thing that separates the present from the past, then any form of animal could have pulled this off as long as they can fly. However, headcanon to me says that the portal was created by some sort of demigod-like entity, like the turtle or Pennywise or something, which then broke through reality, which would mean, dead time, the deadlights, Maine, much like everything else Stephen King writes, it's all interconnected. It was Pennywise. So then what does this really mean? Well, this is a lot like the, unfortunately, the flat Earth image, which I find exceptionally hilarious. It basically posits that the observable Earth that we are on is surrounded by an ice wall, and that if you get past it, there's the rest of the Earth, and that's actually a globe. But the Earth that we are on is a flat Earth because it's all we can observe. It is, if I'm reading this correct, the biggest cope I have ever seen in my life, and my god, is it dumb. But it works perfectly for this analogy. Essentially, our reality and perception is like the observable Earth, and there are walls to that reality. However, past that reality, surrounding it, is a larger, all-encompassing reality, and this is where the Langoliers themselves hail from. So apart from their physical form, how do they actually live? Well, given that they are eating the so far never-ending flow of time, they appear to kind of like inert matter and then turn it into energy, which then fuels their bodies to keep eating. Now the question is, what happens if they stop eating? When their tasks are complete, well, very likely they too would succumb, but that means everything they feed on has already succumbed as well, so everything just starves down the pipeline, I guess. This would mean that really humanity is just the same as any other animal. We are all a part of a large food web that we cannot even see nor really interact with on a conscious level, because our bodies would definitely interact with it. Our bodies, very likely frozen in the past, would be consumed by the Langoliers, which means his dad was actually right somewhat. Those deemed lazy or not contributing or not moving would be consumed by the Langoliers, which, given they are inert biomass, they would become this way because of the lack of energy. The Langoliers do consume us in all of reality. However, our consciousness appears to keep us in the present, using the meat suits to express itself. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. I know biology-wise, this isn't very heavy, as this is I mean, it's just like any other species. It's a floating meatball with teeth, just extra temporal. So when it comes to them, what's really more interesting is actually the discussion about the temporal issues themselves, rather than the Langoliers, which is what the whole book was based on. But if you did enjoy, God, I wanted to drop a Dean Koontz reference so bad, because it rustles some jimmies. But if you did enjoy, then please leave a like and a comment, as it helps the video out there. Otherwise, you're a huge dork. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Instagram, Roanoke Tales link, and Patreon in the description if you'd like to support the channel. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the astronaut tier, we have Kusith and Lipsy Gingy. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the astrophysicist tier, we have Death Dancer, Myura, and Webtron Supreme. Thank you guys as well. At the scientist tier, we have Some Big Nerd, Metric System, Invictus Echo, Official Texan, The Homeless Guy in the Street, Jason, and Gina Elaine. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support. You're absolute ballers for it. So, as I've stated, thank you. So, I hope everybody enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.